Hey everyone, it's Miss Hannah, and I wanted to make a quick video with some pointers and advice to help you be really successful on Essay 2. So the first thing you want to do is choose a prompt from Lesson 7. There's a document in the Lesson 7 folder, and it has a list of 9 prompts. You can choose any of those prompts, but make sure that you only choose just one of them. And some of the prompts might not be really clear and some might not make sense, so focus on whichever prompt you think you could be really successful at writing a paper for, and maybe think about a prompt that draws to mind a particular story or stories. A few of the prompts ask you to compare 2 stories, but most of the prompts ask you to focus on just one piece of literature. So read through the prompts and choose just one from the lesson folder document. And then you're going to write about a story or 2 stories that were assigned in lessons 1 through 6. I know there's a lot of great literature in your textbook, but for this assignment, we want to focus only on stories that have been assigned to us to read in lessons 1 through 6. And just like in the first essay, you want to make sure that you include the author and the short story title in your first paragraph. That lets us know exactly what you're writing about. So if you did choose to write about Raymond Chandler's Cathedral, then you would want to make sure that you have his name capitalized and spelled correctly in the first paragraph, and that you put the story title spelled correctly in the first paragraph, and story titles, of course, go in quotation marks. Your thesis statement should directly answer the prompt's question. So the good news about writing in response to a prompt is that these prompts have questions. So each one of the prompts has a few questions, and I've designed those questions to help you think in an analytical way about the pieces of literature, and that way you can formulate your thesis as an answer directly addressing the questions in the prompt. I'm going to give you some examples. So prompt number 8 on that document is choose a story that makes use of symbolism. How do symbols support and establish the theme in the story? What symbols are significant, and how does each create or reinforce the story's central theme? So you'll notice that there's a few questions here, and the questions are asking you to think and analyze one of the stories. And you could write about any of those stories from lessons 1 through 6 that made use of symbolism in the story. So the really important words in this prompt, of course, symbolism gets repeated several times. Symbolism, symbol, and theme, right? How does it relate to the theme of the story? So that's what I want to focus on when I'm planning to write my paper and when I'm formulating my thesis statement. So here's just kind of a dummy thesis statement. This isn't about an actual story that we've read. I just made this up. But you'll notice that I'm repeating those important words from the prompt here in my thesis statement. So I have the word symbol and I have the word theme. One of the questions in the prompt was what symbols are significant in the story, and I've identified 2 important symbols, so weather and the car. And I've also directly identified the theme of the story. People must sometimes accept what they cannot change. So you want to be specific when you write your thesis statement. You can't just say there are symbols and that there is a theme, but you want to tell us, I specifically identify exactly what they are. So the other thing that the prompt asked me to do is to connect those 2 things. So I'm going to say that the weather and the car as symbols emphasize that theme. And so when I write my paper, all I'm going to do is write a few pages that back up and support this thesis statement. So I'm going to have a body paragraph section about the weather as a symbol. And in that section, I'm going to talk about what the weather symbolizes, how it's described, why it's important to the story, and of course, how it relates to that theme. And then I'm going to have a body paragraph section in my paper about the car as a symbol. How is it described? Why is it important? What does it symbolize? How does it relate to the characters? And of course, how does it relate to that theme? And that's all my paper is going to do, is back up and support that thesis statement. So it's important to remember that your goal is not to summarize the story, but to analyze the story and to answer the questions in the prompt. And I'm going to give you some good rules of thumb for that. One is don't begin paragraphs with statements of things that happen in the story. So a paragraph shouldn't start with a sentence like, at the beginning of the story, two people walk into a bar. Or a paragraph shouldn't begin with, later in the story, they get married. Right? Those are things that happen in the story. So those are pieces of summary, and you don't begin paragraphs with summary. You are going to use examples and evidence from the story to back up your claim. So if I'm talking about those imaginary symbols again, I might put in a quote of how the car is described in the story. But I don't want more than two consecutive sentences that summarize events. So if I have 4 sentences in the middle of a paragraph summarizing a whole scene in the story, that's too much summary at once. So I want to condense it or take some out so that I'm not overusing or over-relying on summary. The point of your paper is to show us your analysis of the story and what it means, not to summarize everything that happens. I promise I have read all of the stories assigned to you. So another way of saying this is to focus on how the author created meaning, revealed characters, or used literary devices. So your job is not to focus on the characters and what they do and say and what happens to them and the events in the story. Your job is to focus on how the author created meaning using literary devices, or how the author revealed characters to us, or how the theme in the story is revealed to us. So focus on what the author's doing in the story. And of course, your paper is going to be in MLA format. Most of you got this pretty right or perfect on your first essay, but remember that you have a heading. Your heading has 4 lines. The first is your name, of course. The second is my name. The third is the class. And the fourth is the date. So all of that's double spaced at the top left of the first page only. So you don't need a heading on any of the other pages in your paper. Everything should have 1-inch margins, everything should be double spaced, and you should have citations. So you should have internal citations. Anytime you have a quote at the end of the sentence, you're going to put the author's name and page numbers in parentheses at the end of the sentence. And then at the very end of the paper, you're going to have a full citation for the whole short story. Important to remember that you use only the story. You don't Google it, you don't use SparkNotes, you don't look it up. I know that we might be inclined to Google it and make sure we're on the right track, but the focus of this paper and really the point of it is for you to show how you can analyze a story, make and support arguments. And if you Google things, you kind of go outside the scope of the assignment, you might confuse yourself. You might end up accidentally including things from an internet source in your paper, which could then be construed as plagiarism. You might get some off-topic ideas and kind of lose your train of thought. So really just focus on your reading of the stories. Avoid first person. So you know the first person words, I, me, my, our, us, we, right? Those are all words to describe first person. And since this paper isn't about you, unfortunately, you don't need to use any of those words. If you are finding that you're using them in sentences like, I think this means blank, just take out the I think, right? And say, this means blank. You don't need to say, it's my opinion that the theme of this story is such and such. Just say, the theme of the story is such and such. Just take out all of that first person. And similarly, you want to take out all the second person. So that's you and your. When you use those words, you're directly addressing your audience. And then for this paper, I'm your audience. And since you're not writing a paper about me, you don't need those words either. Okay, so if you have questions, if you get stuck, if something about this confuses you, you're always allowed to send me an email. I tried to pick a picture of myself that made me look super nice and friendly so that you wouldn't be scared to send me an email if you have questions. And the other thing is you've got a lot of resources at your disposal. So the Lesson 7 folder has a rubric, a sample outline, the prompts, a bunch of information and resources. You have all of the grading feedback from previous essays, the rubrics from previous assignments, and the videos I made in the previous announcements to help you stay on track. So use all those resources and reach out to me if you have questions and think I can help. And I will either send you the resources or answer the question or point you in the right direction. I don't want you to be lost and alone working on the essay. So take your time, write a draft, revise it, and submit your final draft. And again, if you have questions, just let me know. All right, that's it. Happy writing.